Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight, my guest is Donald Jeffries. Before I bring him on, of course, I have to thank C60 Purple Power. Man, I use it every day, and I feel better than I felt in years. I have more energy. I haven't gotten sick, and I lost over 30 pounds, which is a bonus side effect. Even my memory is better. I feel really great, and you should too. Check out all the benefits for yourself. Just click the link in the description or visit c60purplepower.com and use coupon code KNOWLEDGE10. You're going to get 10% off your order and free shipping. Also, please subscribe to Forbidden Knowledge News on lbry.com. That's our official backup channel. And check out Beyond Classified. This is exclusively on Rokfin. It's an amazing new platform for free-thinking independent media, for great content creators that are already there. All those links are in the description. Be sure and check that out. Tonight, my guest is Donald Jeffries. He is an author and talk show host who has been researching the JFK assassination since the mid-1970s. He was a teenage volunteer for Mark Lane Citizens Committee of Inquiry. He is very active on all JFK assassination forums and has been a moderator on London Spartacus Education Forum for several years. Donald, welcome. How are you doing tonight?
Fine, thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Looking forward to it. I haven't done much research into the assassination of JFK myself, and most of the information that I've learned recently comes from my producer, Cory Hughes, who I believe you've had on your show recently.
Yes.
And he speaks very highly of your research. I believe that event was one that paved the way for basically the world we live in now. The shadowy factions have infiltrated everything from the media in Hollywood, and now these big tech companies that are swallowing everything in sight. Tonight, I'd like to talk a little bit about your conclusions about the JFK assassination and also get into some thoughts about some of the events that are happening today after the world basically fell apart in 2020. Before we get into any of that, I'd love to hear what got you started doing your research and looking into the assassination.
Well, I always admired the Kennedys. I came from a Catholic family. I was 7 years old when he was assassinated, and it's one of my first memories, watching the saturation coverage on TV. My family was particularly distraught because they were Catholic, so they all loved Kennedy. And there was conspiracy talk in my family right from the beginning. No one in my family thought that Oswald did it, so I was subjected to that at an early age, and so I never thought he did it, ever. So, but as a teenager, before I really looked into the assassination, I started reading books about JFK. I just admired him so much, and I was very political. I was 11 years old when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, but I was following his campaign very closely, rooting for him desperately in the primary. So I was already aware of politics. And I started reading the Kennedy books, and then eventually it was just natural that I would start reading about the assassination. And once I read one book, I couldn't stop. I read all the early books, and then eventually I did what very few people have done, and that's when I went to my central library. There's only one library in my area that had them, the 26 volumes of hearings and exhibits. And I actually took them out and started reading the testimony, which for the most part is incredibly boring. Have trouble sleeping, you can read it, with a few, exceptions. But just to make sure that the critics didn't misrepresent, they misrepresented very little, actually. They were, pretty accurate in what they were talking about, how the Warren Commission didn't ask the right questions. Most of the record is incredibly padded. And as you read the actual evidence involved in this case, you can see the cover-up on display. Because witness after witness, and in Oliver Stone's JFK, Kevin Costner alludes to this when he says, ask the question. And at one point when he's reading the testimony, a lot of us were saying that as we're looking at it, because they would take witnesses that were largely irrelevant, and they would spend page after page talking about, they basically asking them their life story. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? Who did you marry? What are your kids' names? I mean, the record is so padded with irrelevancies like that. And then they don't ask them the relevant question most of the time. And if they do, a lot of times the witnesses bring something up that is relevant, and they quickly turn away from and have no interest in it. So it's very obvious when you're reading the evidence what was going on. And so unlike some critics, especially now in the JFK research community, I call them neocons, neo-conspiracy believers, where they're peddling that this was a benign cover-up, maybe was not a big deal, maybe some rogue elements of the CIA, anti-Castro Cubans, maybe mob, things like that. But they don't want to go to the heart of it and say this was the deep state as we know it now. This was very powerful elements in the military industrial complex, CIA, that conspired together. A lot of people that had the same kind of vested interest in JFK being eliminated. So I've never believed in the small conspiracy, and JFK got me onto other things. It was natural for me after reading the JFK assassination. I'd already, obviously, as a big fan of Bobby Kennedy as a kid, I naturally went and studied his assassination. Became very clear, obviously, as I've said many times, if JFK hadn't been assassinated, Bobby Kennedy never would have been. So studying the MLK assassination, Chappaquiddick with Ted Kennedy, which I've written about. I believe it was his political assassination. And then I was the first one to investigate the crash of JFK Jr., which I believe was another Kennedy assassination. So, but these things lead into other things. And so, I investigated in my book, Hidden History. I talk about all these things. I talk about, in-depth Oklahoma City bombing, Waco, 9/11, things like that. And you see the connections. And as you mentioned very accurately early on, the JFK assassination, for people that are alive today, the JFK assassination was the tipping point. That's what the igniting point. That's what lit the fuse. And whatever innocence America was, I like to talk about America. If you're looking at a chart or a graph, I believe that on November 22nd, 1963, the day Kennedy was killed, we were at our peak economically, culturally, in the eyes of the world. So if you're looking at a graph, that's the apex, it's right at the top. And ever since then, you can see, it's just a straight down. And I think that it's no accident the 60s erupted the way they did because of the way he was assassinated, and because it was a nonsensical explanation that from the very beginning, 80% of the public or whatever didn't accept. No one ever believed it. Unlike a lot of things in modern, like 9/11, for instance, I don't think more than 25, 30% of the people doubt it in most polls. But the JFK assassination was always a majority of people doubting it. So they never bought it. And I think it really bred skepticism. Up until that time, I think most people trusted their government. And ever since then, clearly the distrust in government has grown and grown. And now, today we look at it, it would be laughable, to say anything, trust that the government was trustworthy in any way, shape, or form. And I think most of that, if the people alive today, in my book, Crimes and Cover-Ups in American Politics, 1776 to 1963, I go over a lot of those earlier conspiracies, and they certainly existed then. But they don't have the same impact that the JFK assassination had with people alive today. Even young people can relate to it because they know other Kennedys that subsequently died, and they hear people talk about it. And really, the term conspiracy theorist was pretty much born in the late 1960s when the CIA used it to smear critics of the Warren Report. So people, now they smear all of us, conspiracy theorists. And it's basically just a term that's used to slander someone who is questioning authority or is questioning a narrative. I've told people many times, if you can find a theory in anything that I'm writing, let me know what it is. I'm just questioning, and I'm pointing out facts and inconvenient facts, as it were.
Definitely. And when you look back, I've had plenty of researchers on that have researched the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and it seems that there were many, I guess, justifiable reasons for these psychopaths to have done this. From your research, why was it done? What were some of the reasons that they killed John F. Kennedy?
Well, they had a lot of reasons, I think. Kennedy was, again, in Oliver Stone's JFK, which I think is a real good film for people that are familiar with it. It's largely accurate. He actually took very little dramatic license, and I think he got most of the good stuff in there. He did a really remarkable job, and to put all that in 3 hours of very entertaining and moving experience. But he, at one point, he says, "I never realized Kennedy was such a threat to the establishment." Mr. X says, Kevin Costner says that to Mr. X when he's meeting with him. And he's right. Kennedy was a threat to we look at it today. Just something as simple as the CIA. He was at war with the CIA from the time of the Bay of Pigs, which undercut his administration right at the beginning and left him out to dry. He took responsibility for it, but he threatened behind the scenes. He vowed, I'm going to shatter the CIA to 1,000 pieces in the wind. So he was wanting to abolish the CIA. Imagine anybody today. I mean, Donald Trump, some of his radical propositions. Imagine if he was, publicly saying, "I want to abolish the CIA." I mean, that was something that shocked Washington D.C. and shocked the establishment. But he was ticked off, that they made him look bad. But I think the primary reason, certainly the CIA hated him, and big business certainly had a reason to hate him. He was cutting out the oil. He wanted to cut out the oil depletion allowance for the oil companies. He battled U.S. Steel, but I think the primary reason the Pentagon and the military-industrial complex hated him because he rejected their attempts to get him into war over and over again, and no other president's ever done that. The Cuban Missile Crisis, he alone stood up against them. They wanted to go to war with Cuba. He and Bobby, his brother, the only ones. Everybody else wanted to do it. If there had been another president, we would have had war. And of course, most importantly, in Vietnam, he passed and he signed National Security Action Memorandum 263 shortly before his death, and it delineated withdrawal from Vietnam. The plan was to have the first 1,000 advisors out by the end of 1963. And all troops out by 1965. And this was, it sent reverberations, as Mr. X says in JFK, throughout the Pentagon, because their plan was obviously to get us embroiled there for a long time. I mean, everything from just, Bell helicopters to heroin. And there was so many things that were involved in that. So much money to be made for the deep state out of that. But once he decided, no, I'm not going to do this. And clearly he wasn't. And then if you want to know about how the conspiracy worked, the day of the assassination, McGeorge Bundy, who I believe, this evidence alone shows was an insider that was a conspirator to kill Kennedy in his White House. He was his national security advisor. He drafted National Security Action Memorandum 273, which completely contradicted 263. It was a plan for acceleration there to get us entangled, which is what happened because LBJ signed it before JFK's body was cold. But McGeorge Bundy had to know that JFK would have never signed that. He would have never signed it. So he had to know he would be dead and he wouldn't be able to sign it. So you want a conspirator? There's one, I think. I don't point fingers too much because it's hard to prove, who was involved. But clearly he was at least one insider in the White House. And I think that Vietnam was the primary reason. There are lots of other tangential reasons. He was at war with Israel behind the scene. Most people didn't find that out for a long time, because he was mad that Israel was developing nuclear weapons. So that threatened our Middle Eastern policy. As you know, certainly in recent years, Israel has run our foreign policy. So this was, again, something that the establishment didn't want because they were in lockstep with Israel. So Kennedy had, and the mafia, I don't think the mafia killed him, but his administration was the only administration to ever attempt to do anything about organized crime. So there were lots of people. And then there, of course, there's the question of the Federal Reserve, whether he really signed, whether that executive order with the silver notes, there's a little dispute about that. But there is no question that JFK's father, Joseph P. Kennedy, was a critic of the Federal Reserve. And I find it impossible to believe, as close as he was to his sons and as influential as he was, that he didn't indoctrinate them into the truth of the Federal Reserve over those dinner conversations that they had at the table when they were young. So I think JFK understood the true nature of the Federal Reserve as well. So lots and lots of people and powerful figures said it was like no other president really we've ever had until Trump, who's kind of a different sort, but it's that kind of thing where he threatened the establishment, and it was inevitable that he was going to be killed, and obviously he was.
Now, you mentioned three kind of entities that come up a lot whenever you're talking about who's behind this: the mob, the CIA, and ties with Israel or the Mossad. Would you agree that those are three of the main, sources, the players that were involved with this?
Well, I think those are common suspects, certainly. I don't think the mob really, I mentioned them. I don't think, again, I keep quoting JFK, but I think it's right. The mob may have been involved on a lower level. They may have provided an actual assassin, maybe, or something like that. And Jack Ruby certainly was involved, was more of a mobster type, although he was an FBI informant as well. But I think that the plot. I mean, again, I have no way of knowing, but I think the plot was probably hatched at the highest levels of what we call the deep state now. That would be kind of the military industrial complex, the military industrial intelligence complex. So I think then you're looking at people like Allen Dulles, who had later served on the Warren Commission. I think you're people at the top, General Colonel Slomaid. I mean, again, these are just my, what I think probably were involved. J. Edgar Hoover and LBJ certainly, I think, approved of it. They had to have his approval, and I think he he didn't create the plot, but he was certainly not going to fight it because he wanted to be president. So I personally think it was a high-level government plot, and I think that's the only reason that explains why, almost 60 years later, you still have our state-controlled media and our politicians continuing to come up with this nonsense, and whatever they speak of the JFK assassination, to refer to Oswald as the assassin. There's no other explanation for it, because if you study the evidence at all, I mean, it's a 10-year-old child could dissect it, in a couple hours. That okay, whoever did it, it wasn't Oswald.
Right. Now, speaking of that, we can probably establish that there were multiple shooters by now. Have you done any research into how many and the whereabouts of these shooters?
No, I don't go into that because, again, I don't think I don't think there's any, and I'm aware of all the theories. I think that the vast majority of witnesses, or the majority of witnesses anyhow, reported seeing something going on in the grassy knoll, what we come to say. So I think someone was there. However, the angle of the bullet to Kennedy's head may have indicated it might have been on the other side of the knoll. And I think there's a case to be made that there was somebody shooting from the storm drain at street level. People have talked about that. And I think there was probably one shooter from behind who was not Oswald, probably in the Dow Tex Records building, which was opposite of the Texas School Book Depository. But I think there was a crossfire, as the late Jim Marrs talked about. There was a triangulation of crossfire. So they were probably shooting from three angles. And, that's what I think happened. But however you look at it, I mean, all you need to know is you don't really need to go beyond the fact that we know the official version says there were basically three shots that hit Kennedy and Connally. We know a shot missed, and that's why they had to come up with a ridiculous single bullet theory that caused 7 wounds in 2 men and was virtually undamaged. When I was a youngster, I went to the National Archives, and I got to hold the magic bullet in my hand. I got to hold the rifle. I saw the clothing. I had a private frame-by-frame viewing of the Zapruder film. It was very heady stuff for like an 18-year-old. But I don't have to know anything about bullets to look at that, to see that, and that was, it wasn't for years until I started becoming more astute and realized, wait a minute, these are sophisticated conspirators. These are people that know what they're doing. Why would they plant a bullet that looked like that? Why would they plant a bullet that looked like it hit something? And that's when I first started talking about what I call calling cards that you see in a lot of these conspiracies. I think that was one of the first obvious calling cards where they, as Vincent Solandri, who just died at age 90 something a few months back, great respected Warren Commission critic, never wrote a book, but was very important. He's the one that said what I'd been thinking for a long time, is that the conspirators wanted people to know what they did. And so they advertised it. And if you look at all the events since that time, for instance, the 9/11, the passport that floated down on the rubble, that's another huge calling card. Because it's almost like, if you remember Jack the Ripper, was sending taunting letters to the police. It's that kind of thing. They're not doing that, but they're calling cards because they know no matter how obvious they make it, the people that are asleep out there are not going to, they're not going to wake up. So it's for people like us. They're entertaining us. They I guess they get a kick out of it or something, but as to how blatant they can be about it. But think of Epstein. Epstein. Right. I mean, the entire world, nobody thinks he killed himself, but that's what they postulated, and so everybody just kind of blinks. And so it's that kind of thing. So, but I think that started. The first calling card I know of was the single bullet, maybe the greatest of all, too, because that probably the magic bullet and the single bullet theory probably is what convinced most people, I think, to understand that it couldn't have been one assassin. Because so the crime, as the great Harold Weisberg, one of my heroes, said, the crime was beyond the means of any one person. It was certainly beyond the means of Lee Harvey Oswald, who was a mediocre shot, according to the Marines themselves. He had no motive, no opportunity. The evidence shows he wasn't up in the sixth floor window at the time. The gun really couldn't be legally traced to him. So for all those reasons, I think what I focus on is that they got it wrong. Lee Harvey Oswald, whoever killed Kennedy wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald, and there had to be more than one shooter because that's what the ballistics show. So I start from there, and I understand all the theories. There's James Files and all these other people that have claimed to be assassins, but I don't I don't get into any of that because it's impossible to prove it. And maybe if someone gave me a budget and let me, have a congressional investigation with subpoena power, the few witnesses that are left, then maybe we can go down that road. But just as somebody who's writing and trying to set the historical record straight, I think the best we can do at this point is to show that they lied to you. But unlike most people in the JFK research community, and this is why I get in trouble with them so much, is because a lot of them seem to believe that, yeah, well, these powerful people got together and they decided to kill the president of the United States. They covered it up. The media went along with it. It's going along with it 60 years later almost. But other than that, it's crazy to believe in 9/11 and some of these other conspiracies because, they behaved themselves after that. They just did this and they're still covering that up. And I think that's incredibly naive. And I think that, we're run by conspirators. And I think this is just one of their most shocking events that they did. But, we kind of look at these things generationally. You go back, Pearl Harbor was like a generational event for that generation. Kennedy assassination was a generational event for the baby boomers, and 9/11 would be like the millennials, event. So these things happen, and they're shocking events. But they're the ones that are protected. The narratives are protected at all costs because so many people were emotionally impacted by them. And they're very important. Obviously, JFK assassination ignited government skepticism, introduced the world to conspiracy theories. The terms like grassy knoll became common and so forth. And 9/11 obviously had a huge impact on our civil liberties and really cracked down on our rights. So these things are important, but I think they're connected, and a lot of researchers don't. But in that, my book Hidden History and Crimes and Cover-Ups for earlier ones, I try to show how these things kind of happen in a timeline. They all have very common elements to them. The mysterious deaths of witnesses, lost, destroyed, or distorted evidence, things like, and of course, most importantly, complete failure of anyone in the mainstream media to investigate any element of it, other than to just point fingers at us and call us conspiracy theorists.
It also seems like some of the same players are involved throughout history with all of these events leading up to this as
Yeah,
well.
absolutely. I mean, I talk about these kind of things all the time. I mean, in Crimes and Cover-Up, I talked about how Nikola Tesla, for instance, who brilliant scientist. A lot of young people know about him today. We've had probably have free energy for all if he was alive, because that's what he supposedly invented. We don't know where his papers are, but when he died, his boxes and boxes of papers and research disappeared. And the person that was sent by the government to go collect his papers and, I guess, throw them down the memory hole was none other than John Trump, who was Donald Trump's uncle. So, I mean, these are, and you get these kind of connections. You go back to the Lindbergh baby kidnapping, which was a huge cover up as well. I mean, they sent an innocent man, Bruno Richard Hauptmann, to the electric chair. The man in charge of that investigation for the New Jersey State Police was Norman Schwarzkopf Sr. Of course, later during the Gulf War, Storm and Norman Schwarzkopf would be in charge of that fiasco. So these people do. I mean, their relations and their people that are connected to them continue to promote these absurd narratives and continue to cover things up because the entire system is rigged and corrupt, and it needs people that are corrupt in it to keep it going, and that's why it's very hard for anyone who's not corrupt to be led into the club.
And speaking to Donald Trump, during his presidency, he released some JFK files. Now, I'm wondering if you found anything of interest or anything profound in those files going through them.
Well, actually, I was on Coast to Coast a few years ago about that when they were released, and we talked about it. But the only one that I found that was any, and again, I don't go through all these things because it's just I love the JFK. I mean, the JFK assassination is my baby still. It's my go-to issue. But sometimes, especially because I'm writing about so many other things, that I kind of get tired of it, or what do you call it? I'm overdosed on it at some points.
Yeah, a
So
little burnout.
yes, burned out. So I did know that the initial document release, there was one document that was interesting to people like me. Now, for the average citizen, maybe not, but and it was just verified what we knew. When they were the mayor of Dallas at the time of the assassination was a guy named Earl Cabell, and he was the brother of Charles Cabell, who was a high up official in the CIA who had been fired along with Allen Dulles after the Bay of Pigs. So it's a nice connection there. Well, this document verified what a lot of us thought, that Earl Cabell, the mayor of Dallas, was also a CIA operative. So it's just, it's not a smoking gun, but it just kind of verifies what a lot of us think. And there are tons and tons of CIA assets and FBI assets out there that people don't realize. And these undercover operatives are everywhere. They infiltrate a lot of. That's why with what happened yesterday at the Capitol, it was natural instantly for people to talk about infiltrators, whether you want to call them Antifa or whatever, because that's what happens invariably. I wrote about that in Hidden History, how FBI and especially undercover agents had infiltrated the Black Panthers and the KKK, groups like that, forever. And that's what happens. These radical groups, they're infiltrated by undercover assets. JFK, Jack Ruby was an FBI informant, and Lee Harvey Oswald almost certainly was some kind of informant, probably an FBI informant as well. And that's why most people think, and I believe Jim Garrison's view is right, that at the time of the assassination, I believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was on assignment, that he had been told to infiltrate a group that was plotting to kill the president. And I believe that group consisted of Clay Shaw, David Ferry, Jack Ruby, all the people that Garrison would later try to prosecute. The only one that survived was Clay Shaw, but and I think that group was being manipulated as well. I don't know what they were told, but they certainly weren't the powers doing it. But I think that's how they manipulated Oswald into being associated with all these people and to become the patsy. But that's how these things work. They use people like that, and they put them in groups, and it's because they don't want the Black Panthers or the KKK, or they don't want any groups like that overpowering them. So they undermine them by putting assets in there, and they become the most violent ones. That's why yesterday at the Capitol, almost certainly whoever decided to burst in, it was almost certainly, I would believe, undercover assets. That's what happens always. Let's go do this, and then of course the crowd gets caught up in it. Most people are followers, so
Right.
I think that's how it works. And but again, I recognize that a lot of people don't go as far down the rabbit hole as I do. But unfortunately, I've been doing this for a very long time, and I'm pretty much at the bottom of these rabbit holes.
I happen to agree with you with what happened yesterday about some sort of infiltration. It just didn't sit right with me, and I think it's a perfect time to kind of transition into what's going on. Whenever 2020 hit, and this news first started coming out of China about a terrible virus, that's going to kill us all, and it starts spreading. What were your initial first thoughts, in the first couple of months of 2020?
Well, and I'm suspicious about everything at this point. And I wrote a lot. My social media presence really grew, although I lost a lot of people too. But I got more new followers than I lost. But because I was skeptical at the very beginning, and I started posting these back when the videos existed, before YouTube clamped down on it. Lots of good videos were out there, empty hospital videos and things like that. People questioned rogue doctors from Germany and elsewhere that were saying this is ridiculous. But I was quoting things from the CDC, and that's what I try to do. I don't quote conspiracy people. I look for official sources, and I use their own. That's what the original critics of the Warren Report did. They used their own evidence to show how impossible their theory was. I do that with the CD. You don't have to do anything else except publish CDC documents, and that's what I was doing all the time. From early on, when the director to the hospitals that you're to list the cause of death as COVID-19 even if a test isn't available or is inconclusive. Doesn't get any clearer than that. And I had John Rappaport. I also had Dr. Andrew Kaufman on, who really became very popular, but he was on my radio show in the beginning before he got too big for me, I'm sure. But and I had John Rappaport on as well, who's done great work on writing skeptically about this. And John Rappaport told me early on that they're listing presumed cases in the totals. So, I said, I trust him. But then later, CDC came out and I started, I looked at their weekly update. Every one of their weekly when they update the totals weekly, and the totals go up and down constantly. They always have, and no one seems to notice. I don't know how that works. But they have a little asterisk, a disclaimer in every one of their reports that note numbers, presumed cases are included in the numbers. So so presumed means unproven. It means untested probably. So the numbers are absurd. And then, of course, you had the CDC a few months back that admitted that I think it was 94% of the deaths, the 300 and some thousand deaths, were actually from other causes. So that's what means only 6%, which you're talking about, I don't know, 12,000 deaths or whatever, which is, of course, it's unfortunate, but it's a very mild, very, very mild flu season. So, and of course, you couple that with the fact they've also told you that the flu has disappeared. The flu is down by 98%.
Right,
so,
exactly. That is insane.
Wow, isn't that amazing? So, yeah, I mean, how can anybody not be skeptical about it? And, and you're still seeing the empty hospital stuff that you saw in New York. In the UK recently, 2 different people have been arrested for going inside UK hospitals and filming empty hospitals. They've been arrested. So, I mean, that's why, we really, some of this stuff is beyond Orwellian. And he was a huge fan of Orwell. I quote him a lot. And I don't think he would even believe some of this stuff we're seeing, but they're using this, even if it was real, which I think it's been largely overblown, whatever it is, but even if it was as bad as they said, the lockdown isn't justified and they are destroying the country. They've had, who knows how many businesses have been closed and are never going to come back, how many millions of people have been thrown out of work, and there's no coming back from it. So, it's not a fun time right now, and I can't be optimistic for America's future because it's just I just see us becoming more and more of the world's wealthiest banana republic.
Yeah, it's like you were saying earlier, they have these events throughout history, the JFK assassination, 9/11, and it looks like this is the new one. This is the new one to shape society into the image that they're looking for us to go into, this new technocracy where we can't have any, we can't be close to each other. We have to stay in our homes, and technology is worshipped. And that is, looks like that's the direction we're going.
Sure. I mean, it's I don't know which is more tragic, what this has done economically, had ruined and devastated so many people, but socially and culturally, this is how many young people are unable to like have a summer fling or summer romance or something, or you're not able to go anywhere. It's killed. I mean, Hollywood, who, ironically, because of their crazy wokeness out there, they're, pushing this, with relentless fury. My next book coming out is about showbiz. So I befriended a lot of these kind of older celebrities, and I, a couple of them, deleted me from Facebook in anger because of my writing about the Cub, because they're just clinging to this with fear, and it's destroying their industry as well. Hollywood is basically shut down. So I don't understand it, and I don't understand why big business, profits mean everything to them. Why aren't they, talking about what this is doing to economically and just socially? The idea how many old people have died in nursing homes since this began, who didn't get to see their grandchildren or whatever great grandchildren be born, and you didn't get to say goodbye to your old loved ones, who didn't even get to have funerals or memorial service. You held them by Zoom and things like. I mean, this is insane what they're doing, and there's no evidence that any of this, that these masks protect anybody. The social distancing thing, the 6-foot thing was picked out of the air. I mean, there's no science. I mean, the idea that this is science, believe the science. Well, you mean the science like when I go into a restaurant in my area, I have to wear a restaurant when I walk in, but as soon as I get to my table, I can take it off. So, I mean, I have to watch the virus. It hovers around the door, and now they have a 10 o'clock curfew in my area. So apparently, COVID only comes out like a vampire, I guess, after a certain hour. So up until that time, you're safe, but get home before. I mean, this is science, and nobody questions it. And it's very sad because they've shown. I've had my. I mean, I knew that I was in a minority before. As far as we in my world, we refer to ourselves as being awake as opposed to woke. And unfortunately, the people that on the left that are woke are the soundest asleep of all. They use that term. It's ridiculous. But the people that are awake, that understand we're being lied to constantly. This has really hit home that we are in a distinct minority. And my family's that way. In every family, I mean, people are, really getting into. I mean, we combine that with Trump as well. I mean, Trump has already caused a lot of division in families, but the COVID thing now is caused even more because people. I mean, you can't see your siblings. You can't see. People are afraid to let you in each other's houses. I mean, Christmas celebrations, Thanksgiving, and then you had, as I wrote at the time, when they New York City and other places put out these decrees that you can't have more than 8 or 10 people or whatever, for Thanksgiving or Christmas. I don't believe any authoritarian society in history. I mean, I don't think the Soviet Union did it. I don't think Nazi Germany did it, where they tried to control how many people you had in your house for a holiday. I don't think they did. So I think we've gone beyond any tyranny we've ever seen with something like that. But most Americans don't even seem to think so. So it's no fun being, in this small of a minority, I can tell you.
No, it's not. And what makes it even worse is the crackdown on free speech and censorship
Oh,
and the
yes.
independent media. I mean, it's getting down to where we have to find ways around talking things. People are
Yep.
being deplatformed. We're going to have to find new platforms soon, which we're already doing. I mean, you're going to have to go behind a paywall just to get good
Yep.
information. It's getting so ridiculous, the crackdown on and censorship on just anything that goes against the narrative, anything.
Absolutely. And it's, again, I'm in a small minority. I mean, as you said at the beginning of the show, I got my start being a teenage volunteer for Mark Lane's Citizens Committee of Inquiry in the mid '70s, and he was my hero and he was my mentor. He was a civil libertarian. That's what I am. I'm an old-fashioned leftist. I'm a classical liberal, a populist, a civil libertarian. Civil libertarians are free speech purists. We believe that no matter how much we disagree with what you say, that you have the right to say it. The First Amendment means nothing if you don't believe that. We all agree with speech that we agree, that we like. That sounds like, oh yeah, okay, you're an echo chamber. Of course, we agree with that. It takes courage, and the First Amendment doesn't mean anything unless you agree with people that disagree with you, because otherwise it's pointless. But the crackdown in social media, especially, is very sad. And when they got rid of all the big channels on YouTube a few months ago, I mean, those were my biggest outside of Coast to Coast, and a few once in a while on RT television or so. I was on the Travel Channel, recently for JFK, but very other than that, kind of a outlier here and there. My regular appearances on things like SGT Report, which had almost 800,000 subscribers on YouTube. Another one that, Red Pill, people like that had hundreds of thousands of subscribers. These were big platforms that I could reach a lot of people, and I loved being on them. And but they got rid of them all of them. And there's not. I think there's one left that I can still go on, but it's sad because again it was only because they were quoting a lot of Q stuff, which I don't believe, but that kind of thing. And they were considered, and of course they were open to skepticism about the COVID stuff. So and it's but you're seeing it now. I mean, I'm seeing, and you talked about this event. I mean, and again, let's analyze what happened yesterday. What was it? I mean, as far as we know, I've heard 4 people died. I don't know if that's true, but we know one person for sure because we're not hearing details about the other 3. We know the one young woman, Ashley Babbitt, that was killed by a police officer. So the only person that died was a female that was an unarmed female shot by a cop. Somehow it's not being framed that way by the media. In fact, they don't even want to recognize that she exists. Certainly nobody's shouting, shout her name or say her name.
Right. Yeah.
So, but it's the narrative is being framed that this was a violent, and again, compare this to the BLM riots all throughout the summer where, buildings were burned, businesses destroyed, looting, rampant looting, lots of people were killed. And the police stood down and watched it. No, but the National Guard, when Trump even hinted about calling out the National Guard, oh, he was shouted down. They wanted to call the National Guard and insulate. The only thing that happened was that the walls of the Capitol were breached, and the people, and again, I wrote something today about, we fought a war for independence to break away from monarchy. So this wasn't Buckingham Palace they were trying to break into. This is the people's representative body. They ought to be able to walk in there. They pay for it. I mean, this is what, our taxes pay for that. So the idea that this is something we can't possibly, and that police have to guard it, that's not a free country. And they're using this already to beef up security. And this is going to be, and you have people like Michelle Obama, these awful people that came out today and basically said that Donald Trump should be banned from social media for life, and so should all other insurrectionists. So, okay, I don't know how they're going to, I guess I would be defined as an insurrectionist, but this is, how do we possibly equate that with a belief in civil liberties or the First Amendment? But that's the problem, is that we're now going to be run as bad as the two-party system was, and it was awful. Because both parties are terrible. But to give the crazy Democrats that are there, I was a Democrat for many years before I became independent. And this is not the Democratic Party. This is a woke monstrosity. These are authoritarians on steroids. These social justice warriors want to get people fired for saying anything they disagree with. This is tyranny that we've never seen before. And it's going to be so bad now. I can't even, and I have to hope that they don't come down to someone at my level, because they're talking about truth and reconciliation committees to basically drag people. I mean, and I am not a Trump supporter, but I'm perceived as that because I criticize his critics all the time. And so, I have to worry about that. All of us do that have any kind of platform, because I don't know how low they'll go, but this is very disturbing. I mean, you have these people that are honestly discussing that we need to do something about the people that supported his enablers. But I mean, you can imagine. I mean, as much as Richard Nixon was despised, I mean, nobody ever talked about it. And CNN was putting out, I understand, some kind of enemies list. Again, they still talk about Nixon's pathetic enemies list, but I don't understand this, and it's very disturbing because and unfortunately people, all that rebellion that was out there in the land was lined up behind Trump, who ended up obviously being what I think was an actor. And, all the opposition was behind his personality, and now there's nowhere to go. There's nobody else there. Where's the opposition coming from? I don't know.
Man, I think you just nailed it. I was just about to ask you that because I don't trust politicians to begin with, and I want to get your thoughts on Trump. I don't trust either side. I think he was, just like you said, an actor, possibly to divide the country even more. But what are your thoughts? Was he at one time, trying to, help, or was he this maverick that the right thought he was?
Well, his 2016 campaign was, I mean, he's the first and only Republican I've ever voted for. And, because I don't think he was a Republican. I still don't. Obviously, most of his party repudiated him and never liked him. But I mean, I realized at the beginning, this guy is a billionaire reality TV star. I thought he had an obnoxious personality. I certainly didn't like him. But he was saying things that I'd been saying behind the scenes for a long time. This country is a joke. The infrastructure hasn't been touched since the Eisenhower years. We're a complete joke. We have a third world infrastructure. It's embarrassing. We need to end all the senseless wars and bring all the troops home. I mean, the first candidate that's been saying that. He hinted at conspiracies everywhere, from JFK to Vince Foster to 9/11, everything. And Roger Stone, who long before he hit the news, Roger Stone contacted me. He loved my first book, Hidden History, and I wasn't sure who he was. He really hadn't become big yet, because Trump was about to announce his campaign, and then he rocketed through the roof. But Roger Stone ended up writing the foreword to the paperback edition of Hidden History. And I talked to him on the phone, and he told me, "You're going to love Trump." He knows about all the conspiracies. That's exactly what he said. So I said, okay, well, wait and see. And he was certainly hinting at those things, but that's Trump. What happened? For instance, the Vince Foster case, he would say, or he'd tweet about Lori Klasutis, the death of Lori Klasutis, and Joe Scarborough's intern. Nobody, I mean, I wrote about that in Hidden History. I don't think anybody else talked about it since that. It's complete cover up. He tweeted about it constantly, but he goes up to a point and he wouldn't go beyond that. He hints at it and he lets Scarborough know he knows, but to get him ticked off. But that's what he did with Vince Foster. He said, well, some people think he was murdered. He said that. So I know he knows it, but what does he do? His second Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh, was the guy who led the cover up for Vince Foster's murder for Kenneth Starr. Now he knows that. So that's the problem with Trump. Trump did that repeatedly. If he tweeted a strong game. If he had governed like he tweeted, he would have been the best president since George Washington. But he unfortunately he constantly either did nothing or capitulated to the powers that be. And so, and now, after what happened yesterday, and I just I don't know to what extent he's in control of anything, because again, I think he's an actor, but I think it's terrible that he and his people got maybe 1 million. We don't know how many people were there, at least hundreds of thousands of people to descend on Washington, D.C. And with the expectation that something was going to happen, something big. January 6th, wait till January 6th, release the Kraken and all this stuff. And so there was anticipation that, Trump was going to drop a bombshell or somebody's going to, and he gives his typical speech. And there was nothing really inflammatory about it. Talk about marching to the Capitol. There's nothing wrong with that. He didn't say we're going to storm the Capitol and, or we're going to go inside. And of course, he ended up going back to the White House. So, but he wasn't even there. But he's being blamed for it all. And what he should be blamed for is misleading people and giving them false hope. And even now, I looked at General Flynn, who I like. I thought it was one of his only good choices, and he immediately threw him under the bus and got rid of him, because that's Trump. But now he's back in his good graces. But Flynn is still telling people, as of today, that Joe Biden will never be president. And so is Lynn Wood, who, by the way, has been banned from Twitter for life. And if you looked at Lynn Wood's recent tweets, he was talking about everything from, Seth Rich murder to, this guy was going deep down. He was talking about all the pedophiles in high places and all these things, really, really deep rabbit hole stuff. I was amazed that they didn't ban him before that, but he's still saying that Biden's never going to be president. So I don't know where this is coming from. I don't see it. And this is Q stuff, that the white hats and everything. I don't see any evidence that anybody is on Trump's side at the high levels anywhere. So I don't know who's going to be doing it.
That's the next thing I want to ask. It seems like this legal stuff is going to go nowhere. He is demonized on every angle and hated from every side. I don't see how it's possible that he could, somehow overturn this. It looks like we should just look towards a Biden presidency, right?
Yeah, well, I don't think there's any way to avoid it, because and this is why I think that if that had been an organic storming of the Capitol, it's understandable, because when you look at what has happened, there's always electoral fraud. I wrote about it in Hidden History. The system is rigged. It's always been rigged to one degree or another. But the problem is it was so blatant this time, and they used COVID to make it more blatant with the mail-in ballots. And because Trump has such a loyal base of many millions, everybody was paying more attention to the fraud. And most importantly, Trump was the first candidate to say he was cheated. Ron Paul was cheated in the primaries. He didn't say anything. Pat Buchanan was cheated before that. Bernie Sanders was cheated. They never said I was cheated. They never claimed that it was rigged. Trump did, and continues kind of to do it. But so I think that was why people saw, and you had Tucker Carlson and even Hannity and Laura Ingraham, every night they were interviewing these whistleblowers, these people that witnessed it. So for them to say there was no evidence, there was over 1,000 sworn affidavits to people. These were lowly postal workers and poll volunteers that got nothing out of this. What were they? There was no upside to them reporting it other than to think they were doing the right thing. And they all saw fraud. So for 60, they took it to court 61 times. 60 times they were ruled against. And some of the judges were Trump appointees. That shows you how corrupt the system is. And they wouldn't even look at the evidence. They would present them with a 700-page brief, and the judge refused to look at it. So, when you have that kind of in-your-face tyranny, I don't, what exactly you have, and you're looking at the electoral fraud, so you can't vote them out. You have a media that is completely controlled, that is not going to report, that just keeps saying there's no evidence of fraud too. So at some point, I can understand why those people get their frustrations, because what are you left with? What recourse do you have? So, and it's just very sad, because I haven't been able to be optimistic about things for years, but now I can't find a single, especially with, the Democrats now in charge of everything. And anybody that watched that Senate race, you're talking about, I just was, paying attention a little, looking at it, and both of the Republicans had, and again, both of them were horrible candidates. The Republicans were terrible. They were empty suits, worthless. But the idea is the two woke Democrats are worse because they might actually do something, and they're going to have power, and they're not going to do anything good. So the problem is that with 92% of the vote, both of the Republican candidates had a 3-point percentage lead. That's a pretty big lead with 92% of the vote in. And they both lost, and it wasn't even close. We saw the same thing happen on election night with Trump, where he was far ahead in most of those battleground states. They stopped counting the votes, and boom, everything flipped. So that's what people, because it's not supposed to work like that. You're not supposed to have delays. And, we're waiting for a vote dump. We never heard that term before. What do you mean you're waiting for a vote dump? You should see, but again, these people, they hear it enough times and they get used to it. So it's because certainly for the people that voted for Trump and who had some idea that he was going to drain the swamp, or certainly we all think the swamp needs to be drained, will they vote for the next person? I don't know what the point would be, because the system is completely rigged. And when you saw what they did in Georgia, or you had the guy Perdue had just soundly defeated that guy Ossoff just at election time. It wasn't even close, but it was close enough so they had to have a runoff. So what happened? What transpired? Did they get all these people from out of state, as Stacey Abrams was urging? That, again, to break the rule of law means nothing. You have residency requirements for a reason. But so this is, but I understand that, and what they do is they will meet any of these logical, criticisms of what they're doing. They'll either call you racist, or that you're a conspiracy theorist or something like that. So, but I don't care. They can call me whatever they want, and because I'm everything I do, everything I write is an attempt to expose corruption and injustice, and so they can say what they want. They can look at my book Survival of the Richest, which is as far left as any book they can find. So they can't attack me as anything like that. But I don't like authoritarianism, and right now the people on the left, the woke left that has taken over that party, is more authoritarian than I think anybody, maybe in history of any country.
Right. Now, another huge thing that's concerning for me and a lot of people right now is, you can't even talk about it. What I'll call it is the Franken jab that they want to distribute amongst the public. It's very concerning because people may not be able to work. They may not be able to travel. They may not be able to go grocery shopping if they don't get the Franken jab. What are your thoughts on how unconstitutional and just wrong this is, that they've rushed through this to get this to us?
It is. And once again, although Trump is perceived as being on the other side, he was rushing the vaccine through. It was his warp speed vaccine. He's always been on board with it, even though he's made comments in the past about how vaccines are dangerous, and he's skeptical about them. So again, it's the dichotomy between what is rhetoric and his actual record. But No, I mean anybody. And this vaccine, I don't believe that these modern vaccines I think, are largely much more dangerous than any kind of good they could do. They're not a polio vaccine, but they was not tested. It was not tested on animals. It was rushed through, and it's insane to be requiring a vaccine for a virus, whatever it is, that is 99 point something non-fatal. What are you getting vaccinated for? I mean, it's absolutely absurd. But again, they've got people fearful of their health, and they got them buying into this narrative. And they are, they're what they're going to do. They'll probably say, "Well, you don't have to get it. You just won't be able to work or go anywhere." And they're already. And when you couple this with that kind of really in your face, heavy-handed authoritarianism, you have, I heard today, they're already talking about again going after people that voted for Trump, and the same kind of thing, not letting them travel, not letting them. I mean, this is unprecedented. I mean, but this is the way the woke left thinks. They want to shut you up. I've never. I mean, the fact that they would ever make fun of Adolf, I don't think Hitler could compare to them. This kind of authoritarianism, but. The vaccine, especially scary because you have people like Bill Gates, who is, mentioned the Franken jab. I mean, I think he's a Dr. Frankenstein feature kind of character. And although he's a mad scientist who isn't a scientist, of course, he knows he's not a scientist whatsoever, but he's, the go-to guy for this idiotic media we have, as if he's some kind of expert. But his closest thing he ever got to viruses are his crappy operating systems that he created, which is one big virus, Windows is. But so he's an expert in that way. But he sits there and kind of maniacally smiles, when he talks about millions of people dying and stuff. So, I don't have much confidence in taking something that this guy wants me to take. And all these people that want you to take it. I mean, these are, again, why are they pushing it so much? And okay, you want, I don't mind if anybody wants to take it, take it. That's fine. But you should have the option to opt out. But and my body, my choice. And that's why, if I was the opposition, I would use that against them. I would use the my body, my choice. It's my right to my body. I put and it'd be hard to make it so because again, the woke left is completely irrational, and they're full of inconsistencies. I mean, look at the way they're portraying what happened yesterday at the Capitol, as opposed to the way. I mean, Tucker Carlson was playing Chris Cuomo's exact same quotes about the last, about the Black Lives Matters things by saying, who said, he exactly said, whoever said protests have to be nonviolent. He was saying those things constantly. So you can throw it back in their faces, but they don't care. They absolutely don't care. So, but that would be my tactic. I would use their language against them and hope that maybe enough feminist groups would get it, because that's their line. It's my body, my choice. I have a right to do with my body. Well, okay, why don't we have a right to not put that into our body if we don't think we need it? And there's no evidence. Again, I mean, I think they're talking about the vaccine is 90% effective or something. So, well, it's 99% not going to kill you to begin with. So you're actually, more of a chance to die if you take the vaccine. So, but again, it's the same kind of thing. I've said from the beginning of this pandemic, whenever it started, that there has not been a single voice, other than on the internet. There's tons of us out there questioning it, and the general public. But as far as people with a public platform, certainly no one on television, no writer, not a single politician. None of these people, even the ones that question it, they may question the lockdown, but they don't question the statistics on the CDC and all that stuff. They don't question the absurd social distancing, the damage that this is doing to society. Nobody questions it. And, I don't know how, again, there's no opposition. And, Trump, I said when Trump was elected, he was our last hope. He's not much of a hope. And unfortunately, I don't see anybody else out there that people can, whether it's misguided or not. Symbolically, he represented an opposition to the establishment. I don't know, without Trump, who is the opposition to the establishment. I don't know.
Well, I think that's kind of what I wanted to end on is A lot of people are hopeless right now because there is no one to look to. I don't think that we have a savior that's going to save us from this, and I think it's up to the individuals, us, to do something about it ourselves. And I think a good place to start would be local governments getting involved with as much local as possible, because there may be some parts of your local government that have not been infiltrated yet. But I'd like to get your thoughts on, in closing out tonight, what do you think we should do moving forward in this situation that seems so hopeless that, most people don't know what to do?
Yeah, I think that I do quote Bobby Kennedy a lot on his "Tiny Ripples of Hope" speech. In fact, I close out my radio show every week with that. To try to that's all. We can do that individually. We can try to send tiny ripples of hope, or we can try to enlighten whoever will be enlightened. Fortunately, you're going to wake, but you wake up. I've woken up people. You can not many people around me. Unfortunately, but I do have people that read my work and whatever listen to me. But I think we can do that, and we can try to. I think we can rally around a cause. For instance, like I'm involved with an internet campaign called the Stop Bitburning campaign, and with a lot of big YouTubers that were involved. They're just trying to stop the censorship. Now they're talking about going to the courts to do it, and again, I'm skeptical because we see how the courts are. They're complete. But I think if enough people got together and started talking about just no censorship, freedom of speech, I think that's an issue that's much easier to rally around than a lot of them, because the left especially, there's still people on the left that will at least tell you, well, yeah, I believe in free speech. I mean, some things they say it doesn't, but at least. So I think that I would press that everybody has a right to be heard. And again, it's not popular because I have friends that continue to give me the nonsense. Well, I believe in free speech, but not hate speech. It's like, okay, what's hate speech? Who determines what hate is? Your definition. It's an emotion, so it's a really slippery slope. So I think you have to believe in free speech, and it's certainly on the internet platforms like YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. It's very, because they're all they're like town squares now. And they're essential to people, especially younger people. You have to be on those platforms to have any kind of life, especially now with everybody being locked down. You're doing so many things virtually that you really. So I would look at it that this is a censorship issue. We have a First Amendment, but unfortunately, we got to move fast on that, because I think one of the things, if the woke left really goes crazy in power, they may try to amend that First Amendment, because they clearly don't believe in free speech, and they may try to put an asterisk in there, except for hate speech, because that's what they believe. They don't believe in free speech.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Don, I want to thank you again so much for joining us tonight. So much great information. If people want to find out more about you, your books, your show, anything else, let them know where they can do so.
Yeah, well, you can follow me on. I need more followers on Twitter. I need to be more active there. I'm very active on Facebook, where I have like almost 5,000 the maximum friends. But Twitter, I need to do more, and so I'm at Don Jeffries at Twitter. I'm easy to find. And my blog is donaldjeffries.wordpress.com. It's called Keeping It Unreal. I write there regularly. Gets good activity, and a lot of my articles are published on Lou Rockwell. It's a big libertarian site. My books are very easy to find. My latest is Bullyocracy, which is about bullying in schools. So I write about social issues as well. I'm going to have a book about showbiz coming out next year. Plus, my two bestsellers by far are my conspiracy books, Hidden History and The Crimes and Cover-Ups. So my publishers asked me to work another one in there. So I have a lot to write about, especially with what's gone on last year and so forth. So it's going to come up with something like Hidden History 3. So that'll be down the road as well. So if you Google me, I'm pretty easy to find, and always looking for more. I have a YouTube channel that I also need to do more with. It's under my name, Donald Jeffries. So I'm pretty easy to find out there, and I'm always looking for more followers.
Awesome. Well, Don, thank you so much again for coming on, and hopefully we can talk again in the future, because we kind of barely scratched the surface of some of this stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot there. There's always something to talk about. Absolutely. My pleasure. Anytime you'd like, I'd be happy to.
All right. We have an excellent night. Until next time, everyone else, have a great evening.